All right, then we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the next PilotEdge IFR workshop. This week we're focusing on standard terminal arrivals, or STARS. These strike just a little bit less fear, in my experience, into people's hearts than SIDS. SIDS have people completely terrified. STARS just have them trembling slightly. So the good news is I think this will be a little bit easier and lighter weight than both the SID workshop and also than the en route workshop. So we'll move through it relatively quickly. There's no PowerPoint presentation for this one. The scope is very, very narrow. I'll give a quick introduction to what STARS are about, and then we're going to review a couple of RNAV STARS and a couple of PilotNav STARS, and then move into people's experiences with them or questions that they have with them. But as I said before, this will be relatively quick and light compared to other workshops. Okay, so what are STARS all about? Why do we have them? So if you remember from our previous workshops, SIDS and departure procedures get us from the airport through the maze of departure instructions and onto the freeway system, or the en route structure, which would be low airways and high airways. And statistically, you spend most of your time outside of an IFR training flight, of course, where on IFR training flights, you spend a disproportionate amount of time shooting approaches, which is not normally how real IFR works. But outside of the training environment, which is a lot of people associate with IFR, statistically, you're going to spend most of your time fat, dumb, and happy in the en route structure at high altitudes, just going from airway to airway to airway, or direct to your destination, whichever the case may be. Once you arrive at the terminal area, so you're not quite at your airport yet, but you have to now do the reverse of what happened during the SID. So the SID's job was to get you from the airport to the en route structure. The STAR's job is to get you from the en route structure to a position from which you can shoot an approach. I'll say that again relatively clearly. The job of the STAR is not to get you to the airport. The job of the STAR is to get you off of the en route structure, so those high altitude airways, to a point from which you can commence an instrument approach. So that's why when we start looking at some of these STARS, don't be too concerned that they don't drop you off right at the hangar or the gate. Their job is just to get you close enough so that you can shoot an approach. So that's the backstory of them, or the context of them. And again, they could exist in an alternative form. They could exist simply in the form of radar vectors from a controller. So it's possible that a controller could give you 4 or 5 different vectors from up in the flight levels with a series of descents down to the terminal area where you could shoot an approach from, but that wouldn't scale very well. It wouldn't allow them to have as many airplanes as they do flying in the National Airspace System. It would cause way too much radio congestion and increase the workload far too much. So just as SID's jobs are to reduce controller workload, the same is also true for STARS. It's to have efficient flow of traffic and minimize congestion on the radio at the same time. So the good news is that let's go have a look at one right now. The good news is the notation for them is identical to what we've been looking at. Give me one sec. That's entirely the wrong window. Okay, I'm a little confused as to where my star went. Hang on. All right, it's official. I don't know how to use my Mac. One sec. We'll just have to grab it again. Okay, there it is from afar. So without getting too caught up in exactly what's going on here, hopefully those that have attended the SID workshop or the departure procedures workshop and the en route workshop, or in fact either of the two, a ton of this is going to look very, very familiar. There's not a whole lot new going on here. We have VORs, we have radials off of VORs, we have changeover points, we have intersections, we have minimum en route altitudes, courses, and distances. There's absolutely nothing new here, at least to my eye. that stands out as being something completely brand new and unfamiliar. And I find this actually very comforting when I was an instrument student. The fact that the notation was so consistent between SIDS and en route and stars just made it makes it very easy to understand the format and look at a chart for the first time and understand what it is that's going on. So ultimately, this is the KO4 arrival into the John Wayne Airport. Actually, it's the KO4 arrival into a number of airports. This is one of the differences where stars are a little bit different than SIDS. SID generally serves a single field. It gets you from an airport to a number of transition points. The star gets you from the transition points. Let's identify what those are. There's one, Hector. There's one, Palm Springs. And that's about it at a glance. And its job is to get you to, in this case, Seal Beach. And that drops you off to start shooting instrument approaches at one or more fields. There's Zamperini Field or Torrance. There's Long Beach. There's Fullerton. There's Los Alamitos. And there's John Wayne. So when you see multiple airports identified, it's something you can file away in the back of your mind that this arrival could be used at any one of those airports. It's not always the case that the star is identical for each of the airports. It might be the same piece of paper, but what they'll actually have is some unique instructions for each airport. So in the textual portion of the star, in this case the textual portion is up here. You can see the Hector transition and the Palm Springs transition. They will sometimes have airport-specific instructions there. So they might say, Zamperini Field arrivals expect, or perhaps depart Seal Beach heading 220, expect vectors to the final approach course, something like that. So if there were any airport-specific instructions, they would be listed in the textual portion here. But in this case, there are none. So this procedure takes us ultimately to Seal Beach from Hector or from Palm Springs. And you can tell by the naming convention, the KO4 arrival, they both funnel into KO. So the procedure is identical from KO to Seal Beach. What is different is if you're coming from Hector, there's a series of instructions to be followed. If you're coming from Palm Springs, there's a different set of instructions to be followed. Let's see if we can follow in the textual portion. We'll take it from the back to the front. It's actually easier to process, I think. So I had said that from KO onwards was common, and here it is at the very end of the document. From over KO intersection via the Seal Beach 075 radial to Seal Beach, then expect radars to the final approach course. And there it is visually. Here's KO right here where my mouse is right now. Let me just get the annotation window open. Okay, here is KO. And that's basically the line that we're following from that point. So it goes from KO to the west out to Seal Beach, and that's the part that's common. And then here's the text that highlights that. Okay, that highlighter doesn't work as quite as I thought. Sorry about that. I thought it was going to highlight the text textually, not graphically. So apparently I have to be more careful with the highlighter. Okay, so that's it from the common point onwards. So all we have to worry about then are the two transitions. So let's look at Hector transition. You'd be forgiven for thinking that from Hector we go to Paradise, and from Paradise to KO. Let's see if that's actually the case. Let's look at the text. From over Hector via the Hector 211 radial and the Paradise 030 radial to Dorna. There's Dorna, and then from Dorna via Homeland, hang on, where did Homeland come from? Then Homeland via these two radials over to KO. Well, that's very different. We had said maybe it was Hector, Dorna, Paradise, KO, but there's absolutely no reference to Paradise in this documentation. So without reading the text, how can you tell visually that it should have been a left turn at Dorna as opposed to continuing straight ahead to Paradise? Any ideas from the non-instrument rated pilots first?
I see arrows pointing in different directions.
Well, The radio you're actually supposed to follow has a distance on it, and it's also a little more boldened.
Correct, yes. And there's one more piece of information that's also included on flyable routes. You had said a distance and it's bolder. Do you see one other piece of information that's there too?
Keith, there's no
Altitude.
MEA.
Yes. Yep. So that's Geneva's right, and Sheriff, that's right. There's no MEA. So any flyable segment, and remember this is consistent on SIDS and low and high en route charts, as well as on these stars. If it's a flyable route, it's going to have three pieces of information: MEA, the minimum en route altitude, a course to be flown, and a distance. Plus, it is a boulder typeface. So I can't remember if it was Chris or Clayton. I'm pretty sure I'm going to mix you guys up for the evening. Let's just accept that now. One of you said that the arrow was an indication that maybe you wouldn't fly it because the arrow is pointing the other way. I completely understand that instinct. I found myself thinking that many, many times. That arrow is purely to help you visually identify what this distance marker is talking about. That just means it's 29 miles from Paradise to this intersection. It doesn't mean that it's not flyable potentially.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, so without reading the text, so the text definitely saved us. So the text will always save your bacon. The text will tell you exactly what you need to do. It can just be a little bit tricky to read sometimes. So you can either start with the text and then back it up with the graphic, or go with the graphic and then confirm with the text. So the absence of the word paradise, or PDZ, Papa Delta Zulu, in this text is a huge level. It should cause a lot of concern for us and tells us that our theory is not working. I tend to follow them visually. That's usually my instinct. Reading the text doesn't usually help me very much when I'm first putting it all together. So I'll literally just run my finger along the arrival and make it turn where it should. And when I come to something like Dorna, I'll stop and evaluate the different choices. And there's only one possible choice on most of the arrivals. There can sometimes be different branches off them when if the airport that you're arriving at is in one runway configuration versus another. So there might be a left turn versus a right turn. For argument's sake, let's just say for argument's sake, after Seal Beach over here, there may have been an arrow that went off to the west for a while. And there'd be a textual note that says, if Zamperini is landing runway 29, then fly this heading. If Zamperini is landing 11, then instead fly this other heading. So if you ever do see a fork, a real bona fide fork after an intersection or a VOR, go check the text to find out which fork you're supposed to take under which circumstances. But those are relatively rare, and I purposely chose an arrival that didn't have that. So it's a left turn at Dorna to Homeland. So let's see. There's another reason I chose this arrival is that this is actually really, really tricky to fly without GPS equipment on board. And notice that in the past, we've always given examples where if you're flying with minimal equipment, you've got to use 2 radials, it's a lot of work, etc. But if you have DME, things get a lot easier. Well, this is the reason I wanted to show this particular arrival is that it has a really interesting feature that you occasionally come across, which is the existence of VORs that don't have DME. Notice the Hector VOR has the standard shape for a Vortec, well, a VOR or a Vortec, a VOR, I should say. Paradise, Pomona, Seal Beach, they all look the same. Palm Springs looks the same. Notice that Homeland does not look the same. Homeland is missing the little bold shape on the outside that indicates that DME is present. So Homeland is a VOR period. There is no DME off it. So what makes it interesting is that if you're flying this arrival just using VOR and DME, when do you make the turn? If you're coming from Hector and you're trying to identify Dorna, it can be slightly tricky to know when to make that turn, because you may be looking for you might see this 29 miles right here. It's 29 miles from Dorna to Homeland, And since you've got nav1 probably set to Hector and nav2 probably set to Homeland, you might just wait till your nav2, if you set your DME to Homeland as well, you might just wait for it to read 29 miles and be good to go. That's not going to work. 29 miles, you're never going to get DME reading from Homeland. That's the problem. So they are rare. In fact, does anybody know of any other ones in SoCal and NorCal? The only two that I know of are the Homeland VOR and the Priest VOR, which is Romeo Oscar Mike up in NorCal. Anybody off the top of their head know of any VORs in our coverage area that don't have DME? Me neither. Those are the only ones that I know. Is there any DME we could use to help us identify Dorna? So the big question is, when have we hit Dorna? Because at Dorna we need to make about a 40-degree left turn. So what are the two ways that we could identify Dorna short of using GPS?
Use DME off Paradise.
DME off the VORs.
DME off of which VOR?
Paradise.
Paradise.
Hector.
Yeah, Paradise.
I'm thinking Seal Beach.
Paradise works. What DME would you use off of Hector?
Looks like you could use 46 miles.
On the 211 radial outbound.
Yep, it is the 211 radial. I'm now wondering, I'm actually not sure what the legality is of using 46 DME because of the slant range distance. If you're up at the MEA, which is most likely to be at around, well, let's see, actually you're going to be at 13,000 feet if you're in a jet, or 12,000 feet if you're in a piston. Those are the crossing altitudes to expect. So if you're at 12,000 feet, it is 46 miles over the ground from Hector to Dorna, but the DME reading at 12,000 feet will be longer than that because of the slant range distance. So if you literally go at 46 DME, you will turn early. Would it be early enough to cause a violation? Probably not. But if you were to fly it on a check ride like that, I'm not sure that they'd be thrilled about doing that. So I don't know if that would, if you could do it. Practically speaking, you'd probably be fine, but I'm actually not positive about the legality of it. So Hector, let's say for now the Hector DME is possibly out of whack. We may not be able to use the 46 DME, or perhaps we can. I'm not positive. The 29 DME off of Paradise will work, I believe. But what's another way we could identify when it's time to turn at Dorna?
The radial off of Homeland.
Yep. So what would you actually tune into the CDI, or the OBS, I should say? What would you set in the OBS to identify that that radial?
353.
You could. You'd then be at risk of suffering from reverse sensing. You might be tempted to make a right turn onto 353 to fly the 353 heading, and that would make you make a right turn at Dorna and head away. So instead, I'd probably use 173. Even though it's the 353 radial, to track it inbound, you want to use the reciprocal. And thankfully, you could do that one of two ways. You could either put 353 on the tail of the OBS and then just fly it, or you could use the number they actually publish. You could dial in 173 instead. Either one would do the trick. Okie dokie, so we've made our left turn at Dorna. I don't think there's anything else going on here that is really unique. There was just the one hiccup. The reason I bring this up is that it caught me quite a few times when I was first flying it. I would routinely just trundle right past Dorna because I was expecting to be able to use some sort of DME off of Homeland, if memory serves. Also, when should we stop using Hector for our positive course guidance? So are we just going to are we going to use the Hector VOR all the way to Dorna, or are we going to stop using Hector and have to use another VOR prior to getting to Dorna? And this has nothing to do with Homeland.
Yeah, there's a crossover point showing there.
Correct. It's hard not to feel like John Madden with this. I wish I had an actual mouse, not my touchpad. I'd be a little bit quicker with it. Okay, so yes, this is, if you remember this from our en route chart workshop, this illustrates a changeover point. So even though this is 46 miles long, upon reaching 31 miles from Hector, we're no longer supposed to use the Hector VOR to track towards Dorna. We'd then swap to using Paradise. So we'd swap to 112.2 and track that towards Dorna. And you'll notice the radial is actually slightly different. Here it's the 211 radial off of Hector, whereas for Paradise it would be 210 would be the course. Probably a change in magnetic variation, I'm guessing, for the distance that's being covered, something like that. Okay, so there's actually quite a bit going on in that case. So we have to use Hector, we have to use Paradise, even though we're not going to Paradise. I think that's what ended up throwing me. I'd make the change at the changeover point, and then just mentally, you know, usually when you are swapping from one VOR to another VOR along an airway and you hit a changeover point, you're now heading away from Hector and going to Paradise, and mentally it's easy to just say, okay, we need to go all the way to Paradise. I'm remembering now that's what it was that kept luring me in each time. It was the changeover point rather than the lack of DME that was the big problem. So upon reaching Paradise 29 DME, you then make a left turn to 173. You know, John, now that I think about it, it's not. It doesn't make any sense that I'm fine with using 29 DME versus the 46. I don't think there's any difference between those two. The inaccuracies are going to exist both ways. So you may well be right. You may well have been able to use 46 DME and been okay. So I take that back about that point.
There might be another problem there, though, in that the changeover point is 15 miles behind you, so you might not actually be getting Hector anymore because of a mountain or something.
That's true. Yeah, you cannot use the VOR for navigation. This is a high altitude VOR. I'd be kind of surprised if you couldn't get DME off it. But perhaps at the altitudes we're talking about, you might be right. There could be terrain involved. That would block the reception of it. I wonder if anybody's ever flown that and seen if that's the case. But yes, there is a changeover point issue there. You're right regarding DME. So from a lateral navigation point of view, I think we've covered most of how we fly this. The big news is the turn at Dorna. That's the one that creates all the work. After that, it's relatively standard. It's homeland, the 257 radial to DJ, and I guess there is a kind of subtle turn here. I have to get rid of my annotations. Stand by. I'm cautious to make sure these annotations don't cause more work than they solve. But this is a little bit of a pain, to be honest. When I've flown this, you're heading out on the 257 radial for 16 miles to DJ, and then you have to make these small turns. Now it's a 255 course to Seal Beach. It gets to be a little bit of work. But it is there. That's when GPS can be helpful. It's just DJ, KAYOH, jog it to Seal Beach. That's the lateral navigation portion. Now the big question is the descending portion. So one of the things we see is people panicking because they think they have to be at Hector at 10,500, and that is not the case. These are minimum en route altitudes. They're not mandatory altitudes. So if you're up at flight level 240 coming from the northeast in your jet or a turboprop of some sort, then what you should be looking for is not the minimum en route altitudes. Those are just there to provide you terrain obstruction and signal reception to be able to receive the Hector VOR, period. That's it. The part that you're really interested in are these vertical navigation planning information sections. These tell you what altitudes you can expect to be at for different types of aircraft. So for turbojets, expect clearance to cross Dorna at 13,000. For non-turbojets, expect to cross it at 12. These have two practical applications. The first is exactly what it says at face value. You should expect to cross Dorna at 13,000. That way, when you're about 30 northeast of Hector and they say citation 123 Alpha Bravo, cross Dorna at and maintain 13,000, you're not stunned wondering what the controller's talking about. You may not quite hear the word Dorna. You may hear Orna or Borna, something like that. The fact that you've already studied the chart and you're expecting to cross Dorna at 13,000 gives you a lot of context. You'll be able to pick Dorna out in the crowd of all the other intersections that you think you might be hearing over the radio. So that's the first part. It literally is exactly what it says, expect to cross it. The second part is in the lost communications phase. So much is made about the world of lost communications. Even though it almost never happens, they try and build bulletproof procedures around it to the extent possible. So the fact that it says expect to cross it at 13,000 means that if you lose communications during your flight, you should look for those instructions on the chart, and then that would be what you would shoot for. So you would you would then plan to cross Dorna at 13,000 if you're in a jet, or 12 if you're in a piston. And looking ahead, we have DJ expect to cross at or above 8,000, so you would do that. And KAYOH, there is no vertical navigation planning. There's just a speed restriction of 210 knots. That's what the line at, or when you have a line above it and below it, it means at that number. So dead on 210 knots for the speed. So you're going to see the expect notation in many, many places, and those are the two practical implications of those notations. It actually surprises me a lot of the time. We'll give someone a crossing restriction and they literally have no idea what we're talking about. And I suspect what's happening is they don't really have the paper-based version of the chart in front of them, or even the electronic copy, I should say. They simply have the arrival dialed into the FMS. And that's fine. The FMS is certainly a great tool for flying it, but you lose, by not having the chart in front of you, you lose that ability to scan those intersections and see that vertical navigation planning information, and you're no longer pre-armed with the information. So when they say Borna or Horna, you're not sure what word they're using. Had you had this played in front of you, you would know that they're actually saying Dorna. So while I'm a big fan of FMSs, I've come to appreciate them more and more, in fact, over the last couple of years. It's not a good idea to just rely on the FMS. It's really a spectacular idea to make sure you have a version of the chart in front of you that you can access for these reasons and many more. So that way you're basically never caught with your pants down. Even if it's the first time you've ever flown the arrival, when they say cross Dorna, add and maintain 12,000, you were expecting it all along. You've been just waiting for it for the past X number of miles. And you've already done your top of descent calculation, so you know when it is that you're going to start down. That's probably the other hard part of transitioning into jets and the high performance turboprops, is working out when it is that you should start down. Sometimes we see people go horribly wrong. In fact, I got it horribly wrong when I was first starting, and I ended up, I was told to cross a fix, I think at 12,000, and I certainly did that, but I came down from flight level 360, and I was at 12,000 something like 60 miles, that's 60 miles, prior to the fix, which meant that I burned probably a couple of tons of extra fuel sitting there at 12,000 feet for 60 miles. So you definitely want to work on which is legal, by the way, but it's not very smart, and it takes a lot longer. So you want to try and work on the top of descent planning, and if there's interest in talking about different top of descent calculations, we can talk through that as well once we're done with the core material. Okie dokie. So let's see. We've done with the lateral. We're talking about the vertical. Differences between the Hector transition and the Palm Springs transition are that we have a restriction here of bands, expect to cross bands at 14, and it doesn't matter what type of airplane you're in, whereas this one is 13 or 12 for pistons. Otherwise, you get yourself to homeland, and either way, doesn't matter what kind of airplane you're in, cross DJ or expect to cross DJ at or above 8,000.
Keith, can we talk about
Sure.
this speed restriction for a second?
Sure.
So the indication is cross KO at 210 knots. So does that mean if I'm flying in an aircraft that cruises at 190 knots, I cannot use this arrival?
Right. If you were assigned the arrival, you would say we're unable to do KO at 210. And then you would just wait to see what ATC says. They may say, okay, disregard the speed at KO and still issue the arrival to you, in which case you're good to go. But yes, by accepting the arrival, you're legally bound to make the mandatory performance restrictions.
So during flight planning, then, I should not, in a 190 cruise aircraft, I should not even plan this arrival then?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, so this would be more for a turboprop aircraft, practically speaking. There aren't too many pistons that can, in fact, there are almost no pistons I know of that would be able to cross KO at 210. Maybe a Lancer 4P, maybe a Columbia. I don't know of too many other pistons that could do 210 indicated. See, the problem that same problem exists on the RIIVR 2 arrival into LA. You've got that 280 knot restriction at Graham, I believe, and if you're in the Citation 501, which is very popular among pilots who are transitioning into jets on the network, that plane is incapable of meeting that crossing restriction.
Yeah, there's a similar problem with the CLAR 2 into Las Vegas.
That's a 250 knot restriction, right, at CLAR?
Right.
Gotcha.
Is there a reason behind that? It's I could understand at or below, but the at has always kind of bugged me. I don't really understand the reasoning behind it.
The reasons for not making it above 210, just for those who aren't clear, is so that they can get you down in time. The descent at John Wayne is one of the most treacherous ones as a controller, because it's a very fine line between having you slam into a mountain and having you be too high for the ILS 19 right. If anyone's ever flown that arrival in a jet, especially a high-performance jet like a 7.3 or a 7.5, something like that, you'll know that it can be difficult to get down. And if you're high and fast in a jet, you're in all sorts of trouble. So the idea is to get you slowed down prior to starting you down, which is why they have KO at 210. That's why it's no faster than 210. In terms of why it's at 210 rather than at or below 210 knots, I suspect it's for sequencing reasons. You don't want a stream of arrivals where someone is just choosing to do 150 knots at that point. You can't have planes 3 miles in trail where one's doing 210 and the other one, the guy ahead, is doing 150 or 140. So I'm guessing it's for purposes of consistency.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Also, Brett asked, are there arrivals for pistons, slower moving pistons? There are, yes. You've kind of hit the nail on the head. Most SIDS and stars are assigned to turboprops and jets. If you're flying a small, slow piston out of an airport which has traditionally a lot of turbojet and turboprop departures, they may not issue you the SID, depending on what the SID is like. If it has speed restrictions or really steep climb gradients, they may not assign it to you. Sometimes they will have a generic SID, especially some of the vectored SIDs. They'll still give to you. On the star side, I have to say I've definitely been assigned more SIDs than stars, but every now and then I do get put on a star, as long as the star doesn't have speed restrictions on it. So I flew into, where did I fly into? Fort Worth Airport and also DFW. I've flown into in a single engine piston, both times IFR, and both times got a star. So it definitely does happen. Okie dokie. So let's see. Any questions about that arrival before we move on? You'll notice that we haven't talked about how this flight ends. How do you get from Seal Beach into John Wayne? And it just doesn't matter. It's beyond the scope of this particular workshop, and it could go a number of different ways, none of which are that important, at least I think right now. So when you're planning on the star, you should plan to go all the way to the end of the star. Be prepared to do that. Understand the altitudes, understand what radios or nav radios you would set to make that happen. Will you go all the way to Seal Beach if you're heading into John Wayne, which is down here? Absolutely not. You're not going to be doing that. You'll get vectored to the final approach course, which is what it says in the last sentence, sometime prior to that. Also, don't be too upset if they pull you off the arrival. Here are the places, practically speaking, that you might get pulled off this arrival prior to then. KAYOH. You might be told to depart KAYOH on a specific heading. Depart KAYOH heading 280, vector's final approach course. So if you hear that before you even get to Homeland, here's a question. If they say depart KAYOH heading 280 and you're between Dorna and Homeland heading southbound, and they say depart KAYOH heading 280, do you go straight to KAYOH and then depart it heading 280? So that is, do you leave the star immediately and go to KAYOH, or do you continue on the arrival until you get to KAYOH and then fly the heading of 280?
I think you continue.
I agree. Continue, as I said, depart, not go through.
Not direct.
Correct.
Well,
Not
they told you to depart KAYOH. They didn't tell you to depart Homeland or Donna.
Right, but the question is, how do you navigate to KAYOH? So we know that when you leave KAYOH, it's got to be on a 280 heading, as opposed to the 255 heading that the arrival calls for. But the question is, do we abandon the star immediately and go to KAYOH when they say that, or do we just continue on the arrival until we get to KAYOH and then do the thing that they told us to do?
I think you continue.
Well, they didn't modify anything except after at KAYOH, so I would think the rest of it would be enforced.
That's absolutely correct. Everybody is right. So the question then is, why so many people, when we say that, go straight to KAYOH? It's okay. I was hoping to learn something tonight and see if I could find someone who thought you would go to KAYOH and possibly kill them and dissect their brain, even though that seems harsh, but yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's why nobody wanted to come forward, because they knew that we'd want to kill them. But no, you do not.
Well, the reason they go direct KAYOH is they haven't been to your seminar.
So yes, you don't confuse an instruction to depart an intersection with an instruction to go direct to an intersection. So if we did want you to go direct KAYOH, we would say, Citation 3 Alpha Bravo, clear direct KAYOH, depart KAYOH heading 280. So that's how we say, forget the arrival, we don't need you on the stinking arrival, there's no traffic coming from Palm Springs, and we don't need you to do this 90-degree turn here, which is a lot of work. So we're going to give you a nice shortcut. So between Dorna and Homeland, don't be surprised if you get a shortcut. Don't be frustrated. It happens. And that will only happen, of course, if you're in a RNAV-equipped aircraft. If you filed slant Golf or slant Foxtrot or /Quebec, slant India, all of those will cause the controller to smile and go, cool, I can send you direct KAYOH. However, if you're slant Alpha or slant Uniform, both of which would be legal for this, it would be fine, we're not going to give you direct DJ or direct KAYOH because you can't go direct to those fixes if you don't have GPS. So we'll just leave you alone. But that's one of those practical cases where you will get a shortcut potentially if you have GPS. So this really applies. I mean, you could pick any point on the arrival. ATC will vector you off the arrival for any number of reasons. Sequencing is another good one. If we have planes coming over Palm Springs and somewhere between Hector and Dorna at the same time, if you guys arrive at Homeland at the same time, that's bad news. So we have to take steps to ensure that doesn't happen. We can either use speeds or we'll use a sequencing tool. And a sequencing tool would be to take the person who's about to make the left turn at Dorna that takes them towards homeland, and instead give them a shortcut to DJ. So controllers will use sequencing tools to make that happen as well. So expect to be pulled off the arrival. It can happen literally anywhere along the way. Don't be frustrated, but in lieu of being pulled off the arrival, be prepared to fly it the whole way.
Question, Keith?
Sure.
So now you've, if you go direct to KAYOH from in between Donna and Homeland, you're flying at 12,000 feet with the non-turbojet. Will they give you a new altitude because now you're bypassing Homeland, crossing at 8,000? I'm sorry, not Homeland, but DJ?
Correct. So at this point, the minute they pull you off the arrival, any speed restrictions or altitude restrictions for points that we're no longer going to, such as you said, DJ, DJ is now completely obliterated. We were just told to go, say, direct KAYOH. The KAYOH-4 arrival is now gone, doesn't exist for us. We're simply going direct KAYOH, and then we're departing KAYOH on a heading. Those are the only things that matter. The actual arrival itself has now been terminated. So yes, you'd be suspicious. You'd say, okay, originally they would have had us cross DJ at 8,000. So sometime between now, when we're at 12,000 over here, and here, we're probably going to expect a descent. If you don't get a descent, I'd start getting concerned because you don't want to be over KAYOH at 12,000 feet. Anytime you're way, way, way above what the arrival would have called for, bearing in mind that 5 miles before that at DJ, they'd normally have you at 8,000, that's probably an issue. So that's actually a really good question. No, legally you'd stay at 12, but you'd certainly be primed for the descent. And what will happen is the controller is now going to use his or her minimum vectoring altitude, since you're no longer on these, think of them as airways. Procedurally, they're just the same as an airway. In fact, some of these literally are airways. You can see these Victor 283, 587 labels. They actually are airways. Those no longer apply, and all that applies is the controller minimum vectoring altitude, which sadly is not available to us as a pilot. So you'd expect to hear not long after the direct KAYOH, or in fact in the same instruction as KAYOH, citation 3 Alpha Bravo, descend and maintain 9,000 or 8,000 or 10,000, something like that.
Excellent, thank you.
If you were using you're coming in and between Donna and Homeland, and you listen to the radio, there's not a lot going on. Is a pilot allowed to request going direct to some fix like that, or is that a no-no?
That's an excellent question. And Mark, I know you had a question at the same time. You guys blocked each other, so I'll get to you as soon as I do this one, then for Calvin. That is a good question, and in the real world, I would probably not request it, because chances are if they could have given you a shortcut, they would have. I would say on PilotEdge, it's more reasonable to request it, because we actually don't give shortcuts as often as we could, simply because we could, for purposes of traffic, give you shortcuts all day long. We don't have the same amount of traffic that there is in the real world. So whereas in real world, you get shortcuts whenever they can possibly swing it, if we did that here, you'd never fly your routes, period. You would just get cleared direct everywhere. So that is one of the areas, I guess, where we differ. We're gonna slow down on the shortcutting, and sometimes we'll forget to give you one of the shortcuts that you would probably get in real life when traffic permitted. So I would not be shy about asking on PilotEdge, say, hey, can we get request direct DJ or request direct KAYOH? Feel free to request that. That's okay. But I would probably not do it as much in real world.
Thank you. Sorry, Mark.
Sorry, Mark. That's right. It was one of those locks. Go ahead, Mark.
So we've departed Donna, and we're on our way down, and we get the proceed direct KAYOH, depart KAYOH at whatever, 280, and then our comms fail. Now what do we do for altitudes?
Had they given you a descent, or are you still stuck at 12?
Oh, maybe they gave us a descent down to 9, but yeah, let's just say we're still stuck at 12 because we're now no longer on the star. So what do we do for altitudes?
The last assigned altitude would apply until you can get yourself onto a segment of the published approach or a star. In this case, they had told us to depart KAYOH heading 280, Vector's final approach course. So I would probably continue with that, but the altitudes become a little bit blurry as to what you should use. In theory, you should maintain the off-route obstruction clearance altitude, the OROCA. That's the only thing that will keep you alive. If you get to KAYOH and fly a 280 heading, 280, you know you're now stuck again, right? You don't know what altitude you should be at. Anytime you're stuck on a vector and you lose comms, you're supposed to proceed directly to the thing that they were vectoring you towards. That's great if they're vectoring you towards a fix or a VOR or something like that, but if they're vectoring you to a final approach course, it's a little tricky to proceed direct to a final approach course. So quite honestly, in that case, I think I would, any kind of a lost comms situation is heads into emergency territory pretty quickly. I would actually deviate from the clearance at that point at KAYOH. Instead of doing the 280 heading that they told us to fly, I would actually resort to the comfort of the star again. And because the star is taking us, remember what the goal of the star was at the very beginning of the talk? The stars take you to a point from which you can shoot an approach. I think I would do that. I would go KAYOH. I'd start flying the altitudes that are assigned, that are available, so 6 down to 4. And at Seal Beach, I would shoot an instrument approach from Seal Beach into John Wayne. This is all assuming that it's IMC, by the way. I would shoot the approach from Seal Beach using the full procedure, which is the I-6 rating, by the way. So that's, in that specific case, I would ignore the 280 heading because it actually causes, it has that ambiguity, which is the reason you asked the question, which is what altitude you're going to fly, because you're stuck at 12,000 feet. Let me pull up the en route chart. Practically speaking, I don't know how you would have time to do this, but since we have the time to do it, let's look at what the low en route chart says. Think of it as the minimum safe altitude for this area when you're not on an airway or a star. So let's look at KAYOH. To jog it, we could be at 6K if we were on this procedure. If we're not on this procedure, if we're just randomly navigating where my mouse is right here on that 280 heading, let's see what altitude the en route chart says we can actually get to.
Keith, while you're looking that up, I just wanted to make you aware that you're at 38% battery power since you're not plugged in.
Oh, thank you. See if we can find the OROCA. Actually going to have to zoom out to find it. The OROCA is a almost useless number that applies over a giant area. See if we can find it. I want to say it's 10,600. Is anyone seeing anything contrary? Here's what the OROCA looks like. It's this giant number here, and it applies within this grid, which, as you can see, is an absolutely massive area. So I think 10.6 is as low as you're going to be able to get, if I'm not mistaken. So here's our context. There's DJ, there's KAYOH. We went from, pardon all my spelling. There we go. That's the best I can do right there. Here's Dorna over on the top right. We should have gone Dorna, Homeland, and continued west, but we didn't because we got sometime after Dorna right here, we got a shortcut. We were told to go direct KAYOH, and they left us at 12,000, and then we lost comms with an instruction, a previous instruction of maintain 12 and depart KAYOH heading 280. So we get to KAYOH. The lowest we could get to if we did fly that 280 heading would be 10.6. And there's the reason why it's 10.6.
Where is in 6 you're talking about? It's taking a while to load. Okay, I see that. All right. I thought you were talking about inside that green box.
Gotcha. Nope. Yeah, so this is called the OROCA, Off-Route Obstruction Clearance Altitude, and you can see just how spectacularly useless the number is because it covers such a massive geographic area. If there is so much as a bump on the ground within 30 miles, it's going to affect the OROCA over hundreds of square miles, and that's what's happened here. So we have some mountains out here which are ruining it for everyone else. All this area over here where it's relatively flat, you're still stuck at 10.6 because of this over here. That's my understanding of it. I've never really had anyone contradict it. During my training, I asked a couple of instructors about it, and I said, yeah, I think the OROCA is about as low as you're going to be able to get. So that, yeah, I think you're sort of stuck there. Mark, what do you think of that idea of treating it as an emergency? Oh, so let's just review the two options. One is depart KAYOH heading 280, and then you're stuck at 10.6, and you just have to join the final approach course at John Wayne yourself. It's not really depicted here, but here's John Wayne. There's the back course for it. So we're talking about a line that goes up this way. So you're going to now join the localizer at 10,600 feet on with a 90-degree intercept. I'm sorry, actually even more than that. 110-degree intercept, and you have to lose all that altitude because you did the 280 heading. The alternative that I'm proposing is you get to KAYOH and you say, well, I got no comms, I'm stuck, I'm going to get back on the arrival and go to Seal Beach and shoot the approach from Seal Beach, which is a warm and cozy procedure that you'll fly with absolutely no surprises because you're following a charted procedure the entire way. So you have to sort of choose the lesser of two evils on that one.
Yeah, I do see the problem here. That's definitely why I asked this, and that line of attack seems to be correct to me. I mean, it wouldn't surprise the controllers. I think if they saw you doing it, I think they'd know what you were doing, particularly when you executed a reversal there at Seal Beach and headed back.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so for those who are mystified as to what procedure we're actually shooting at Seal Beach, just know that there is an ILS approach procedure that begins at Seal Beach. There's a chart for it, which we'll be covering in the next workshop. And it's completely flyable without communications. In fact, that's why they publish the full approach from Seal Beach, specifically is if you lose communications or if the controller loses radar. They can no longer, if they no longer have radar, they can't vector you to the final approach course. They would simply say, okay, go to Seal Beach, cross it at this altitude, and you're cleared for the approach, and tell us when you're inbound at a certain fix. And they have to do the whole thing blind. So that's, yeah, lost communications, you could spend a long, long time theorizing about what the correct thing is to do. I've learned through speaking to people who are much smarter than me that you do have to treat it as it quickly becomes, practically speaking, an emergency of sorts. And being an emergency, you're allowed to deviate from a clearance to any extent required to meet the emergency. So I think, Mark, you have the right idea, which is they're not going to be, I think, too stunned that you're rejoining the arrival, you're descending as the arrival allows, and then you're shooting an approach from a place where the arrival ended. That, I think, is a lesser evil than being on a random vector to then try and join an approach with a 110-degree turn to join the final. So you're on a 280 heading and you've got to go to 190. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's a 90-degree turn, my mistake. It's still a very, very hard turn and you're still stuck at some random altitude. Or you're going to try and plot your own descent using any terrain avoidance tools that you have in a very short period of time. So I would definitely give myself the time. And again, the beauty is even though you can't hear them, they can still see you on the scope and they're going to be, once they work out what it is you're doing, they'll clear a pretty wide they'll give you a wide berth. They'll get all the other IFR aircraft out of the way, and you'd be well within your rights to. I don't think they give you too hard of a time for flying that approach at the end of the day.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for that sidebar there.
No, I think it's very, very worthwhile. There's only one more thing I wanted to cover on that arrival, which is what if they leave you high? So let's have a look at our chart getting a little frustrated at how hard it is to get back to my PDF.
At the bottom there? Yeah.
Very good. There we go. Okay, so let's back it up to, you're up at flight level 240. They say citation 3 Alpha Bravo, cross Dorna, add and maintain 13000, and John Wayne altimeter 29901. So you do that. You're now stuck at 13. And then you don't hear anything from that point on. You hear them talking to other airplanes, but you're still stuck at 13. 2 questions. Do you feel pressure to descend to 10.5 after Dorna? Yes or no? And the second part is, do you feel pressure to get down to DJ at 8? The answer to the first one should be relatively obvious. The second one may feel less obvious. So first question, should we be in a rush to get to 10.5 after Dorna?
No.
Is anyone feeling compelled to get to 10.5 after Dorna?
I would, simply because I would try to be in a position that I could get on down to 8,000 without too much trouble.
Yep, understood. Yeah, so you're getting a nagging sensation that, okay, we should be descending any minute now. You know, that should be about the level of tone that's going off in your mind. Like, okay, we're prompt and ready. Anytime you're ready, controller, I'm ready for lower. You may not necessarily say it immediately, but you're certainly thinking it. But it should not go any further than that. You should not feel legally compelled to hustle on down to 10.5. There should be no urgency, other than the longer-term plan of, I just don't want to be left too high. So yes, that's the correct. That's correct. Now the second thing is, if you don't hear anything at all, so first test is done. We don't magically drop to 10.5. If you did just magically drop to 10.5, you run a very big chance of getting killed by the guy who's coming out of Homeland northeast bound at 11,000. You don't know that he's not there. You have no way of knowing that as an IFR pilot. So the instruction was, if there's any doubt, it was cross Dorna at and maintain 13,000. That's why the phraseology is at and maintain. It's not just cross Dorna at 13,000, because all that does is give you positive guidance to Dorna. It's ambiguous as to what should happen after Dorna. That's why the phraseology is designed that way. So at and maintain 13,000. So here we are, fat, dumb, and happy at 13, although we're getting slightly paranoid. Now once we get to Homeland at 13, we might be in a full-blown panic, because aren't we supposed to cross DJ at 8?
Nope.
And the answer is nope. Right, correct. We're not supposed to cross it. We are simply to expect to cross it. And the controller being busy and not talking to you is not a lost comms situation. You have to have faith that the controller is prioritizing, and as uncomfortable as it is, truthfully, I'd be stunned if you were still at DJ at 8. Never seen it happen. Sorry, at 13. But if the controller is speaking at 1,000,000 miles an hour to a bunch of people who are about to hit each other, that is a higher priority. So the controller will prioritize. And when he or she is good and ready, they will give you lower, assuming they're executing perfectly. And there are times when we don't execute perfectly, and we may accidentally put you on lower priority, or we might forget about you. So if the controller takes a deep breath and sounds relaxed, and you're still stuck at 13,000, that's a great time to say, request lower. Just 2 words will do it, request lower. And they'll say, oh, sorry about that, yeah, cross DJ, add and maintain 8,000. Okay, they're going to give you that crossing restriction after only looking at you for about 2 seconds. They're going to say, is this person ridiculously close to DJ? Because if you're ridiculously close to DJ, me telling you to cross it at 8 is downright unfair, and it may make you panic and put you in an awkward spot as a pilot. So if you're ridiculously close, they won't say that. They'll say, sorry about that, descend and maintain 8,000. Descend and maintain means exactly that. So now you just start a regular descent down to 8. Here's where the gray area happens as a controller. We look at you, we're busy, we say, okay, he's reasonably far from DJ, but I've only looked at it for about 2.5 seconds before I've made this call. We're certainly not going to have time to do the math. So what we're going to do is say, cross DJ, add and maintain 8,000. You as the pilot need to push back if that's not going to work for you. If you read it back, you're saying, no problem, we can do it. If you think it's a problem, then say, unable.
Yep.
So while you're sitting fat, dumb, and happy between Dorna and Homeland, wondering when he or she is going to give you the descent, do some math if you can to work out when would be the latest point at which I could start this descent. Because if we start getting to that point and they haven't given us the descent, we either want to say something if time permits, or if the controller is just stupidly busy, just know that after the point of no return, let's just assume it's, for argument's sake, homeland. That's a good place to say. That's as good a place as any to decide that we can't make it, and mathematically it might work out just exactly that way. So if you're just crossing homeland, or you've just passed homeland, and the controller says to 3 Alpha Bravo cross DJA to maintain 8,000 because they finally got to you, then you just push back and say unable. They'll know why. They're not going to say, well, why can't you do that? You know, they'll have looked at you for a couple of seconds, known that you're in the kind of gray area, and they'll put it on you, just basically throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. So your job is to make sure it doesn't stick if you can't make it. You know, you don't have to, well, if you can go to idle, that's helpful. We appreciate that. If you can get the spoilers out, we appreciate that too. But you certainly don't want to point the plane straight down and do a 5,000 foot per minute descent to make that happen. So just know that it happens from time to time, and you simply say unable, and the controller will say, most likely, descend and maintain 8,000, and that's about it. Or, you know, give me a good rate down to 8, which is slang, but it happens in the real world all the time. So it's basically the controller saying, okay, it's my fault, my bad. Just help me out if you can. Come down to 8,000 without breaking the plane. You don't have to make DJ at 8, but the sooner you can get down to 8, the better for both of us, most likely. Whether it's for shelving of airspace, you know, maybe there's a guy who owns above 8,000 after DJ, and now he has to coordinate with that controller and explain to him why he has an airplane above 8,000 at DJ and why he needs to retain control of you. Or it could be for your own good. It could be, okay, you know, you want to get down because, yes, I left you too high, but as you now know, if you don't get down in a reasonable amount of time, you're going to have trouble getting down on the ILS at John Wayne, which is already hard enough to fly, by the way, even when you are at the published altitudes. So that's the stuff which usually gets interesting on these arrivals, is the give and take of the vertical descent planning on some of these tight arrivals. And this is one of the tighter arrivals, where the timing of the descent is important. If ATC gets it wrong, they have set you up for failure, and it's going to take some work to undo it. So the thing you can do is, you can't control much, but as the pilot, what you can control is knowing what your point of no return is. So, you know, again, if you're at 12,000 feet in our turboprop, we need to get down to 8,000 feet. That's a 4,000 foot descent. We know that we can only swing 2,000 feet a minute at best out of this bucket of bolts. If we can do 2,000 feet a minute and we've got to lose 4,000 feet, that's a 2-minute descent. It's going to take 2 minutes to get from 12,000 to 8,000. 2 minutes at, say, 240 knots over the ground is 4 miles per minute, and so 2 times 4 is 8. So as it turns out, as long as they give it to us 8 miles prior to DJ, we can swing it. But if it's after 8 miles, it's not going to happen. That's a way of doing it. So that's about how long it took me to do it. That was, I don't know, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. There is time on this arrival, is what I'm saying. You've got, you know, you could be working this out at any time. You could do this during the en route leg if you like. So rather than browsing the web, feel free to start looking at these things and calculating your points of no return on crossing restrictions. It's a great way to stay engaged in the flight and do some mental math, which is always good for your brain anyway, I think. So that's the sort of stuff that I would calculate, so that way when they come back to you at 12 miles out, 12 miles prior to DJ, and they say cross DJ at a maintain 8, say, okay, we'll cross DJ at 8, and then you start your descent. You know you can do it. So knowing the performance numbers of your plane is the key to it all. You have to know what speeds you'll be flying in the descent, what the descent rates are, get really comfortable with those round numbers, and then get good at doing that math if you can. That's it's not for everyone, but I find it makes it gives you a lot more control and knowledge as the pilot to know whether you can or can't make certain restrictions. Any other vertical planning questions on the arrival here? Okay, so I've been away with the the text for a little while here. Yes. I believe this denotes the common part of the arrival. So the transitions are in this font, if you like, the medium bold line, and then the common part of the arrival appears to be in this in the heavily bold line. I read one comment from Rod Machado that really stuck with me, which is once you see the seriously double thick bold line like that, expect to be vectored in that point. Not sure if it's coincidental or not, but that's one of the attributes. That's what's significant about it, is once you get to KAYOH, this is an indication that in all likelihood, unless you lose comms, which we talked about, you're probably not going to Seal Beach, especially since the airport is down here. So expect vectors once you start seeing the double thick tracks there.
I have a question.
Okay.
Concerning the double thick line, now are you saying that that is what is written or what you've heard? Because to my way of thinking, what it would says to me is that there is this one leg of traffic coming in from the northeast, and there's one coming in from the east, and now you're on where both of those traffic. It's almost like they combine the thicknesses of those. They indicate that now you're dealing with traffic that's funneled into this from two different places.
Yeah, that's a reasonable assumption. The separation standards don't change, so it's not really possible that it could be let's see, significantly more densely packed than what it could have been when you were on the medium bold line, so that the separation standards are still the same. Certainly, you're
right. It's because it's from homeland. But it's not from homeland. It's from the intersection, which no, this is not the logic.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the merging actually happens at the homeland VOR. That's a really good point. Yet the double thick line only starts after KAYOH.
From what you were talking about, the writing in the text box above the last two lines support what you're saying.
Oh, I see. Yeah, expect radar vectors final approach course. That's true from KAYOH. I wonder if that's a coincidence or not. It's probably time for us to look at another arrival and see if this has panned out or not. See if that's true. All right. Has anyone got an arrival that they're particularly interested in covering? If not, I'm going to pull up probably one of the ones into Vegas or maybe Ontario. Actually, I'm going to do Ontario, unless there's another one that people are spectacularly interested in.
By the way, whoever that was that pointed out that the merge actually occurred before that, thank God I didn't notice that.
Well, it appears we have fairly consistent theme here. Here's the CETA 2 arrival with transitions at Palm Springs and Julian. And in this case, the merge point happens to be CETA, but as we've seen, that's coincidental. But in this case, it does say the same thing, expect vectors to the final approach course. I'm still not positive whether the double thick line always means expect vectors to the final, or if it's simply the common approach track after the merged, sorry, after the common part of the arrival. So the CETA 2 arrival, so after CETA, maybe everything is always in the double blank, the double thick line. I've not really paid, honestly, I've never really looked that closely to that part. The only things I normally look for, honestly, are whether it's flyable or not flyable. So the distinction between the oceanside radials here, for example, versus the Julian radial, that is something I look for every day of the week. The difference between a medium bold line and a double thick line, I have to say I've never really perceived before, other than when I was reading the Machado text and he said, if you see the double thick line, expect vectors. I'm now trying to work out if that is legally binding or if it's that way every single time, or if it's simply because that's where the arrival, the transitions end and the common part of the arrival begins. I don't want to spend too much time on this. If anyone ends up finding out, if they do any digging and find examples which prove it one way or another, I'd love to know, actually. That would be kind of cool, and I'll post a follow-up note in the archive for this. Okay, let's see if there's anything new on this arrival real quick. At a glance, there is not much, except for, this is actually a great, this is one of those conditional pieces that I was talking about. Remember when we talked about the fork? If you see a fork where they're both flyable, you have no choice but to go do some reading and find out what to do. So let's say we're coming from Palm Springs and we're landing at Ontario. Let's see what it is we expect to be doing. So we're going to follow our mouse. I haven't even read the text yet. I'm just going to move my mouse. We're going here, we're going here, we're going here, we're going to CETA, and then, well, who the heck knows? We're either going to go straight or we're turning right. I have no idea which. There's nothing here which is going to tell us definitively. Don't even spend time looking. Let's go to the text and find out what happens after CETA. So it's not going to be in the transition notes. We can skip all that. Okay, so here's what's going on. If you're landing at Ontario, there's a chunk of text. If for all other airports, there's a chunk of text. So there's one conditional right away. So we are landing Ontario, so let's look at that. All right, this is broken into two chunks, runway 26 left and right, and runway 8 left and right. So if you're landing runway 26 left and right from over CETA via the PETIS, SB is the identifier for the PETIS NDB, PETIS NDB 292 bearing to the PETIS NDB, expect ILS approach. So that makes sense. If we're landing west, you can actually see the localizer right there. If we're going to be landing west, then at CETA you make a right turn, goes direct to the NDB, join the approach, and you're good to go. If you're going to be landing east at Ontario, then this 26 right localizer does nothing for you. In fact, it would hurt you a great deal if you're trying to land the other way. So in that case, that's when you follow the approach out to Paradise. Or if you were landing at any one of these other airports, you would continue out to Paradise. So good. I'm actually glad I picked this one at random because it showed that conditional logic that I was talking about. So the text is important. Don't think you can always get away with just using the graphics. There are times when the graphics do not contain the information you need. As you just saw, as we demonstrated, I start with the graphics, but the minute I hit any kind of ambiguity, you go find it in the text. Well, awesome. The only thing I have left to cover is RNAV arrivals, or I should say profile arrivals. The RNAV is actually less interesting than the profile. Go ahead.
Before we leave this, quick sort of two-part question here. So if we do not have an an ADF in the airplane, then we cannot file this arrival. Is that correct?
That's a good question. If you were landing in Ontario and they were landing west, let me think for a minute.
I would assume if you're RNAV, you're still fine because PETIS will be in your database, won't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, RNAV. For RNAV, it's not a question. Mark, I assume you're talking about the case where you're non-RNAV and you're asking if you don't have NDB?
Yeah, exactly. We're slant alpha or slant uniform, and we don't have an ADF.
Gotcha.
You still have the localizer, and you've got a bearing off or a heading off of Cedar.
That's the part I'm thinking about. Practically speaking, they wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. The problem is if there's an incredible wind from the southwest, you got a 40 or 50 knot wind from the southwest blowing you towards these mountains up here. If you simply flew it as a dead reckoning leg, if you flew the 292 heading blindly and waited for it to intercept the localizer, there's no guarantee that that 4500 is going to keep you from hitting something. That would be the problem. There are TERPS regulations on how long these dead reckoning legs can be. I'm going to guess legally you can't fly it without it. But I'm not 100% sure on that one. Practically speaking, I don't think it matters a great deal. I mean, what Calvin just said is, practically speaking, going to be fine most of the time. Plus, again, you'll most likely be getting vectors to final anyway. So practically speaking, it won't matter so much. But from the legality, it's always good to know what the exact legal interpretation would be. If you're unable to fly that, you're actually unable to comply with what that is saying you need to do. So I'm pretty sure you actually wouldn't be able to fly it unless you had an applicable substitution for the NDB. And dead reckoning, they do use dead reckoning on stars sometimes, and this would be one of those cases where dead reckoning probably would have been fine, but unfortunately, because the text of the arrival says that you're specifically supposed to join a bearing and maintain that bearing to the station, if you can't pick up the station, period, then you're out of luck. I don't think you can, you certainly can't, I don't think you can accept the arrival. That's the problem there.
So a related question now is that we are ADF equipped, and we're told that we're going to be landing west, so we're expecting to fly that, and as we approach Cedar, or perhaps even as we make our turn, we realize we're actually not receiving the NDB. What do we do?
In that case, you just hold the controller. Say we're not receiving PETUS, and they'd say, oh no, no problem. Fly heading 290, join the localizer.
Okay, great.
All right, I'm going to plug in my LLAP topo before we run out of batteries here. We can actually take if we want to take like a 5-minute break. There's only one more arrival that I'd like to cover, and then I'm good. So I have, what are we at? I'm sorry, my time zone is all messed up. So I'm 8:26 Pacific right now, so 8:31 will recommence. Very good. So we'll definitely wrap up within half an hour here. And there's only one more, possibly two more that I wanted to cover. And that is the profile arrival. Don't worry, all the stuff that I'm doing right now, if it's scrolling not very smoothly or not updating properly, you're not missing anything important. Just trying to get to the arrival. There we go. Okay, so back into it. We're going to cover two more types of arrivals. This is called a profile arrival, and then we're going to cover RNAV arrivals if there's time. RNAV really doesn't pose anything much more interesting. They're just like regarding SIDS, it's how you navigate. There isn't really much in terms of symbology that's new. They're actually very simple to follow because they're less about radials and more about just individual waypoints, with one exception, which we'll look at briefly, but a profile arrival is much more interesting. So when we looked at the KAYOH arrival before, we saw instructions to expect to cross. However, until we were told to cross them at those altitudes, we would simply just maintain whatever altitude we were told to maintain. The same is not true. We have this new notation here on the RIIVR TWO arrival. So let's have a quick look. Before we get into the specific symbols, let's make sure we understand roughly what's going on here. LA is over on the southwest corner. This arrival has two transitions, Hector and Palm Springs, and that's confirmed by looking at the text of the arrival. Hector transition, Palm Springs transition. This ultimately gets us to RIIVR. RIIVR is an initial approach fix for different ILS approaches into LA. So again, getting back to what is a star, it gets you from a transition to a point from which you can shoot an approach. So that is definitely true on this arrival. So we're going to be going either from Hector, which is heading southwest, one right turn at Graham to Rusty, and then another right turn all the way down to River, or we'll fly it from Peach Springs. Straight shot down to Graham, and still to Rusty, and a right turn into River. So the funnel point here is the Graham intersection. But we have one new notation here, which is what this is, which is what makes this so interesting. So when you're flying this arrival, you're working with Los Angeles Center. You're up in the flight levels. You're somewhere up here after one of the SIDs out of Vegas, for example, heading towards Hector in Europe, flight level 280, heading into LA in a 767 or a 737, something like that. And the instruction will be cross Graham at and maintain flight level 180, something along those lines. It's actually a little bit different than what the chart calls for. The chart says to cross it between 17,000 and flight level 210 at a speed of 280 knots. Yet the controller just told us to cross this fix at a very specific flight level. They said flight level 180, no higher, no lower. The controller's instructions are what matters. So you ignore the fact that the arrival would have called for something between 17 and flight level 210, and you simply cross it at flight level 180. We do the top of descent calculations again. I won't do them here just for time, but you miraculously arrive at Graham at flight level 180, and shortly after, you're told to contact SoCal approach on 132.07, something like that, which is the SoCal approach frequency for that area. You check in with the controller, and now instead of the controller telling you to descend and maintain, or to cross a fix at a certain altitude, you then hear citation 3 Alpha Bravo, descend via the River to arrival. So this phraseology that's new is this descend via concept. They didn't tell you to cross at a specific fix, and they didn't tell you to descend and maintain. They said descend via. That means that the altitudes published from this point on are now legally binding, and that's what you need to do. Not the MEAs, but these restrictions here, the at or above or at or below restrictions. So in this case, for HABSO, it's at or above 14,000. So remember, we were at Graham at flight level 180, and the controller hasn't actually said cross HABSO at or above 14,000. They've simply said descend via the River 2. So we need to cross HABSO at or above 14, and we have to cross River at or above 12,000. My ability to highlight isn't going too well. That's because I'm holding down the control key to talk, which is messing things up. So there's the at or above 12 portion, but we also have to cross it at or above 12,000, but we also need to be at or below that was much harder than I was hoping. At or below 14,000. An easy way to think of it is between 12 and 14,000. So this might seem complicated, but there's only three concepts here. One is Graham at 18, HABSO at or above 14, so that means between 14 and 18, and then River between 12 and 14. And that's how you descend via the arrival. The MEAs don't, as you can see, the MEA is way, way below the HABSO of at or above 14. So the MEA is not really relevant here.
Keith, are those MEAs on the Peach Springs inbound course also the ones at the flight levels? I've never seen that before.
They are, yep. I haven't really paid as much attention to those before, but yes, they are probably for NavAid reception.
Gotcha.
Look at those changeover point distances. 103 miles, 119 miles.
Okay, yeah, that completely makes sense now.
Any questions about the descend via? It's honestly, I haven't received it as a piston aircraft before. I've been on an arrival where those were being used with jets, and I was given something other than that. I was given an altitude below all of them, probably to stay out of their way. So I had 747s and A380s and 767s a couple of thousand feet above me descending on the arrival, and I was given something lower than all of them to basically make me invisible because my speeds were not compatible with their speeds. So truth be told, this is really not something I have seen for piston aircraft, but it's good to know what the phraseology means just in case you come across it, or if you're curious about it when you hear it being given to other airplanes, or if you're progressing into larger jet and turboprop aircraft on the network, and you're encountering that phraseology for the first time. Okay, that's the descend via, and we've only got one left, which is an RNAV arrival. Okay, here we go, last arrival of the night. This is the KEPEC 3 arrival into Las Vegas. Here's Las Vegas International Pier, and here are the two transitions, Daggett and 29 Palms. And this is a profile arrival, which we saw, we just saw with LA, so the notations are not going to be new. We have a restriction of Meisen at flight level 240, not above or below, just at 240. We have CLAR at 13,250 knots for the speed, KEPEC at 13, IPUMI at 11,230 knots, NIPSO at 9, Sunset at 8, Kimi at 8, unsure why they have that twice, CHIPS at 8 but 170 knots, and that is all. So if you're cruising somewhere southwest of Daggett and you've been cleared for the KEPEC 3 arrival, that was part of the IFR clearance, you might hear descend via the KEPEC 3 arrival. You might get that from the center controller. In fact, you're not going to hear it from the center controller. Only the approach controller is going to issue a descent like that. Instead, the center controller is going to just say to cross CLAR and maintain 13,000. So we break it up into two steps. It's inefficient, but there are the reason for it is the center controller doesn't own any of the airspace below 13,000. That's all owned by the Las Vegas approach controller. In fact, Las Vegas owns all the way up to 19,000 for that matter, but our SOPs don't allow us to, don't allow the center controller to issue the descent. So that's why you only get the CLAR at 13 while you're talking to Los Angeles Center. But once you check in with the Las Vegas approach controller, which will be shortly before CLAR, you'll hear the controller is likely to tell you, the approach controller is likely to say, citation 3 Alpha Bravo, descend via the CLAR 2 arrival and expect whichever approach they're going to give you. And that's, again, is beyond the scope of this workshop. This is just on the star itself. But look at the efficiency that we gain from those simple words, descend via the KEPEC 3 arrival. Look at how many descents it saved that controller issuing. Instead of leaving you at 13 all the way up to KEPEC and then using split-second timing to say, cross IPUMI at a maintain 1000 at 230 knots. Then you'd have to read that back. Then you'd do it. Then at IPUMI here, cross NIPSO at a maintain 9000. Then you do that. Then cross Sunset at a maintain 8000 at 210 knots. Then you do that and read it back. You know, that all of that is replaced by descend via the KEPEC 3 arrival. So I think these arrivals are fantastic in terms of efficiency. These vertical profiles really, really help because they both give you speeds to work with and altitudes, and they're pretty easy to read. It's I personally find like that HABSO at or above 14 back on the LA arrival, that is probably harder to understand and deal with than this. This is pretty cut and dried. It's a bunch of step downs at very, very clear altitudes, and there isn't really too much to mistake here. Where it gets interesting here is if they pull you off the arrival. And this will happen. You'll check in with the controller, and the controller in a robotic tone will instantly spit back, descend via the KEPEC 3 arrival. And so you read it back, and then they start feeling generous, or there's another person coming in on the sunset arrival from where my mouse is over here on the west. It's obviously, it's a different chart, but just so you know where they're coming from, they're coming this way. And again, for sequencing purposes, they might say, citation 3 Alpha Bravo, clear direct sunset, or clear direct NIPSO. Well, now the problem is, what altitude do you fly? And the controller, depending on how alert they are at the time, they may reissue the altitude. They may say maintain 1000 or something like that, or they might say nothing. If they say nothing, you're in trouble. You have a discontinuity. You've been told to descend via an arrival, but you're no longer on the arrival. So if that happens to you, say, and what altitude would you like us to maintain? Don't try and guess or suggest, just ask them what altitude they want, because you literally have nothing to go by at this point. So they should then restate it. They'll say, oh, sorry about that, maintain 1000 for now. Or cross NIPSO at 1000, then descend via the arrival. So they could keep you at 11,000. Remember, they're pulling you off the arrival to save time to keep you ahead of that jet coming from left to right. So here we are heading from Skiba direct to NIPSO, and they're keeping you at 1000. And once you get to NIPSO, then you rejoin the arrival and also the vertical portion of it. Don't let that freak you out too much. You'll be at NIPSO at 11,000 in that case. If you can't get down to sunset, say unable sunset at 8 or something like that, or maybe they'll be able to give you a NIPSO at 9. I'd have to look at the minimum vectoring altitudes. But when you're in no man's land over here, the crossing restriction of IPUMI at 11 is useless to you if you're not on the arrival. So just use whatever altitude they give you, and if they don't give you one, then certainly ask them for one.
Keith?
Yes.
So if you're around Skiber and they give you this shortcut and they give you something like clear direct NIPSO, resume the arrival, does that tell us what to do?
It doesn't, because they didn't give you an altitude to maintain. You said we were at Skiba and they say clear direct NIPSO?
Right.
Yep. No, we're still in trouble because we're in no man's land between Skiba and NIPSO. What altitude are you going to fly between Skiba and NIPSO?
Gotcha. So we have to ask. It just comes down to that.
Yep. Yeah, it's a mistake. The controller made a mistake, and so you want to seek clarification, because the last altitude, the last vertical assignment they gave you is no longer relevant. So the last thing you were told to do was descend via the arrival. Well, we're not on the arrival now. We're going to be once we get to NIPSO. We're good to go from there. But what do I do between now and NIPSO?
Keith, are you going to elaborate on the procedural turns?
Which procedure turns?
You've got a turn at Skiber, and I guess it's just a holdover Boulder City.
Gotcha. I'm glad you brought those up. Yes, I should elaborate on those. Sorry, was there? I will do that in just a sec. Was there another question too? Mark, did you have anything, or was that you who were trying to talk at the same time?
I think I answered my own question. It's fine.
Okay.
I actually have a quick question, Keith.
Go ahead, please.
So, same situation, Skiber, direct NIPSO, he gives you cross NIPSO at 11,000 or whatever. Is he going to say resume the arrival? 'Cause I feel like if it's not said correctly, you can't continue to descend once you hit NIPSO.
That's excellent question. So there's two different instructions that could be given. He could say clear direct NIPSO, cross NIPSO at and maintain 1000, and then join the arrival. Or sorry, clear direct NIPSO, then join the KEPEC 3 arrival. That's the lateral point, the lateral part of it. Cross NIPSO at and maintain 1000. The at and maintain part is the important part there. So you're still stuck at 11,000. He'll give you lower at some point afterwards. But the join the arrival portion is purely a reference to the lateral navigation. It doesn't give you the vertical part again. If he wants you to descend the arrival, he will have to say that again. They'll actually have to say, clear direct NIPSO, then join the KEPEC 3 arrival, and at NIPSO descend via the arrival. So as long as they use the descend via portion, then you're good for the vertical profile. If they simply tell you to join the arrival or rejoin the arrival, it's only a reference to the lateral navigation.
Okay.
Wow, that's a great distinction. Thanks.
Very good. And on to the holding part. So if something's gone horribly wrong with the sequencing and they need you to hold, then they will say, citation 3 Alpha Bravo, I have holding for you, advise ready to copy, and you go darn it under your breath. Try and say darn it before you hit the push to talk key, and then say, okay, 3 Alpha Bravo is ready to copy. All right, citation 3 Alpha Bravo cleared to the SCIBA waypoint, hold southwest as published, expect further clearance at 30 time now 05. So they will, that's your holding clearance. And the hold as published is a reference to this. It gives you the course that you need to hold on, and importantly, they're giving you the leg length. So this is a 7-mile holding leg. So it's 7-mile legs. So rather than saying clear to the SCIBA intersection, hold southwest on the 031 course to SCIBA, 7-mile legs, right turns, they simply say clear to SCIBA, hold as published. Or hold southwest as published, I should say. That's what those tricks represent. See the difference between the holding at SCIBA and Boulder City? Notice the dotted lines.
That's the hold.
It is actually the hold. It's actually a hold for lost communications, which is covered here in the lost communications part. So some stars have a specific lost communications procedure. So rather than the generic lost communications procedures that we've been generating, if there is a published lost communications procedure, you're expected to do that. So at Preno, execute the ILS 25 left approach. If unable, proceed direct Las Vegas VORTAC. So you have to go direct Vegas, direct Boulder City, and then hold, and then maintain 8,000. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do that until you're out of fuel or what, but at that point, again, it's considered an emergency. You know, if the Tracon has a problem and their radios fail, and you can't shoot the ILS approach, then that's what you do, because that's what the lost communications procedure is telling you to do. If you're now stuck at Boulder City and things aren't improving, then, you know, let's say it's a problem with your aircraft, which is much more likely to be the case, then you have to take matters into your own hands. You'd look for an approach that you can fly from Boulder City and take it from there. But yeah, anytime you see dotted lines, it's always a lost communications procedure.
Okay, Keith, I'm going to plead ignorant on that southwest hold. I look at it as southeast. Can you correct me on that?
Well, I saw the 030 chart, which is, sorry, the 030 course inbound. So it's a northeast inbound course. And so you're...
okay.
Yeah, so it's a northeast southwest orientation.
I was just looking at the orientation of the hold itself from the SCIBA.
It's unfortunate there's a curve there. You know, it's at some point you will be southeast of SCIBA, that's true, but the majority of the hold
You're heading west.
Is flown you're holding southwest of the fix itself. Yep.
Okay.
Even though
I got it. Thanks.
Yep, you got it. You are correct. At times you are southeast of it, but you're generally holding southwest of the fix.
Keith, how do you fly a 7 nautical mile leg? Does this presume you've got RNAV?
I'm glad you asked, Matt. He's going to whip out the annotation. We're going to finish on the annotation. There we go. Yes, you have to have RNAV capability to fly this arrival. That was established way before we had the holding, too. Notice there are no VORs in reference to all of these waypoints. So how would you identify KEPEC, IPUMI, NIPSO, Sunset? There's no radials or VORs that they're based off of. The entire procedure requires RNAV capability for sure.
So I
Well,
guess
not
what
only
I'm
that, the difference between having triangles for a standard intersection and the fact that you have these kind of rounded stars is the difference between points and intersections. Those waypoints don't have any physical location in space. They only exist in the RNAV GPS database.
Right, yep. Correct. Mark, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so what's bothering me here is sort of the, although this isn't a square, it was bothering me is sort of the square root of 2 problem here. That 7 nautical miles is measured from what?
It's 7 miles from, I think it's the leg length. So it's once you're established on the outbound portion of the hold, that's a 7-mile leg length.
Yeah, that's what I thought it meant, and that's why I have to ask again now, how do we measure it?
You want the inbound leg. When you're established inbound, you want to be 7 miles from the fix, correct?
I've never actually flown these, so I'm not positive. I don't think it's related to the... I'm honestly not positive if it's related to the inbound leg length. I know these are typically used for arming, when you're flying RNAV procedures where you have an initial approach fix where you're doing a hold in lieu of a procedure turn. When you return inbound, that point is now going to act as a final approach fix. If you fly that hold too tight, i.e. too short of a leg, it's not going to allow the unit to go from terminal mode to approach mode. So they have leg lengths published for that reason. But how they are actually measured, I've never actually stopped to think about it, to be honest. So I'm not going to try and make up the answer on that one. I'd rather try and look that up to see exactly where it is measured from. I know I'm pretty sure it's the leg length, but how you measure it, I'm not positive.
Okay.
I wish I'd flown more of them to know. Yeah, the big question here is when is it okay to turn back inbound towards Skiba? If you turn too early, well, I don't really see what the consequence is, quite honestly, of doing these too early. I'm not sure why they... I know that I can tell you that airlines prefer to fly as long a leg as possible because the turn, for example, 3-mile legs is not much fun. So they allow up to a 7-mile leg. If you were to cut that short, practically speaking, I'm not sure what the ramifications of it would be. But they certainly don't want you doing more than 7.
Yeah, it's just 7 miles is such an odd number. You know, if it was 5 miles, that would make sense because, you know, that's basically a minute. Or if it was 10 miles, that would make sense because it's 2 minutes. But 7 miles is just weird.
It's gotta be.
Well, it's the intersection. If you go to SkyVector and look at it, it'll explain it pretty good. You're coming off of the Golf's VOR. Let's see, what radial is that? I can't. 308. You're coming off the 308. You cross the 308 on that leg that you're following. It's 7 miles to, looks like, the 30 DME.
But none of that is published on this arrival, though, Calvin.
Nope, but he was asking how would you measure it, and you know, I'm just telling you what I'm looking at. I do see, you know, it's 7 miles from that intersection which crosses that radial that I was talking about on the V135, and that intersection is on the V394 and it's 7 miles to, like I said, to that, I think it's, yeah, the 30-mile mode C. I'm not saying they should have put it on there or not. I'm just answering the question how you might measure it.
I wish I knew the exact answer. I know that an RNAV equipped aircraft has to be able to fly specific leg lengths and holds. I just can't tell you exactly if it's measured. If it's measured from the point where the most aircraft are able to identify where you are within a holding pattern, and they will actually be able to measure what the leg lengths are. I'm just not sure exactly technically where it gets measured from. I'm not sure if it's after you complete the first 180-degree turn, or if it's, I'm pretty sure it's not simply just being 7 miles from Skiba itself. I think it's anticipating when you're essentially a beam, if you can picture 7 nautical miles on this side of the hold, but also 7 on this side, I guess that would be 7 miles from Skiba. But your distance from Skiba at that point would actually be more than 7 miles. However, once you complete this turn, at the time you complete the turn inbound, you would be 7 miles from Skiba. That much I'm pretty much sure about.
Hey, Keith, I just looked at a video from King's School, and it actually shows it would be 7 miles from Skiba. I just posted the link up on Speak.
Is it 7 miles?
It says 7 miles. So in this case, it would be Skiba.
Is it just in the video, or is it further down?
No, I only saw it in the video, so there's no point in watching it unless you want to watch it. But I didn't see it
Everybody
in
will be
writing.
flying 250, so there'll be a standard turn. So Skiba, 7 miles Skiba makes sense.
Yeah, actually that does. At 250 knots, 1 minute leg would be about 5 miles, which would be about 7 miles from Skiba at that point.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. There was 7 on it. Right where you're 1 up. Right there.
I think that's just the chapter number somehow.
Well, it said something about the distance for 7. I didn't know.
We should actually open the AIM on this one. I'll take that more to the Q&A side. We are actually right on time pretty much. And this is exactly what I wanted to finish on, was this arrival. So I am going to continue looking at this because it'll be, hang on a minute, if executing DME legs, since we're right on it now, I can continue here. Begin turn to inbound leg at the DME distance. Okay, so it is that simple. It's just when you're that far away from the executing DME. Yeah, I guess we are executing DME legs. That's what they are. So yeah, when you are 7 miles from Skiba, you would make the turn. I'm going to double check that in the AIM real quick. But otherwise, I'm happy to. This is the end of the core part of the presentation, and we can definitely hang and chat or do the Q&A thing. I am personally going to dive into this in the AIM real quick to see what I can find on holding. I guess that's just the notation. Even though they put the 7 miles on the outbound portion, it's simply once you are 7 miles from Skiba, you can then make the turn. I'm still curious if when you complete the turn, would you be 7 miles from Skiba or not? I might try and do the math on that, see if that works out. But otherwise, I'm good to go on the core content.
Yeah, so Keith, I would say you would not be. I would say you would be about
be
5
less.
miles.
Yeah, geometry will make it. There will be about 5 miles or so.
Thanks again for these classes, by the way, Keith. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is actually a really good turnout, considering I did 0 promotion of this because it's been a tough week health-wise, and a tough 2 weeks with some health issues, and now traveling. I did some last-minute traveling here for PilotEdge, so I wasn't able to promote this. But thank you, everyone, for coming along. I appreciate it. Hopefully, this was a little fun, quick one, and a little bit lighter than some of the other ones we've covered. And I'm hoping that some of the knowledge that we got from the SIDS and en route stuff also applied here and made it a little bit easier to digest this material. So next week, real quick, not next week, but 2 weeks from now, we're going to dive into the world of instrument approaches. I guarantee that will be fun and interesting. There'll be lots and lots and lots of cool stuff to cover on that. And it will almost certainly be more than one workshop. We're going to do precision and non-precision contact approaches, visual approaches, all that good stuff.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. All right, let's have a look at this aeronautical information manual then.
So I'm thinking, Keith, that since it's a DME number, that takes away all the timing of the 1 minute and 2 minute legs.
Absolutely, 100%.
Well, at Skiber, you're at 30 DME, so that's not too tough to handle, I don't think, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
There's no DME involved in flying it with RNAV, though. With RNAV, you're not concerned about distances from VORs or anything like that. The holding leg of 7 miles is just in reference to Skiber itself, and I guarantee 100% that the hold is flyable without any reference to anything other than Skiber, based on what we saw on that chart. The fact that it may be a certain distance from another VOR is as far as I know, not. It would just be complete coincidence.
It makes about 1 minute, pardon, for 4.2 miles, 250, and that's 5 miles into Skiber. So I would say that's what they do, just standard turns, and to help you, they say, well, you need 7 miles, make the turn.
Gotcha. Let's see, just trying to find the aeronautical information manual part on it. Oh, here it is.
Excellent work, Keith. Thanks again.
I'm sorry, I missed the I missed who that was. I apologize. I didn't have my list of people up.
Clayton here. I'll sign off. It's past my bedtime.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. Any GA pilots here had to fly a hold before that was assigned by ATC that you weren't expecting?
In the real world?
In the real world?
Or
yeah,
on PilotEdge?
No, real world.
Yes, a long time ago.
I caused someone to hold once at my airport. He was closer than it was 3 of us arriving back at Lincoln Park Airport. 3 of us were IFR, but one of them canceled. And I'm not sure why he canceled, because it was actually IMC. This other guy was closer than me, but I was a good deal faster than him. He was in a Cherokee 6. I was in the Lancer, and he, the controller was making jokes about it. He's like, he told the Cherokee, I'm sorry guys, but that Lancer is smoking you. He goes, he's going to get there first, and he's going to get the approach. And the guy said, that's right, I don't mind, he can, I'll hold for him. And so he actually did assign a hold to that plane. He had him holding in a VOR. That's the only time I've seen a GA hold.
As a passenger coming into Denver Airport, I've been in holds in the summertime many, many, many times.
Really?
When there's thunderstorms in the area, it's really common.
Can somebody tell me the standard turning, the timing?
You mean for holds?
Yes.
I think it might vary based on type of aircraft. To be honest, I only ever memorized the kind of plane I fly, which is a piston, but unless it's otherwise specified, it's 1 minute legs.
Okay.
So here's what's bothering me about this diagram. This is simply holding at a fix that is based on DME. So this is a hold where we're holding at the 15 DME fix. the 15 DME has nothing to do with leg lengths. That's just where the fix at which you are holding. So what I'm trying to find is a description of lengths here.
I think you would go down a little bit further, like 537 and 536. It should have it.
There we go. So here's the, if you're at or below 14,000, it's 1 minute legs. If it's above 14,000, it's 1.5 minute legs. Here we go. All right, we're getting there.
It's determined by the DME or ADT readout.
And
In the middle of the 5th paragraph there.
Yeah, and that number is the ATD.
And that's just what we expected, or suspected anyway, after a little conversation, so this isn't surprising.
But it's not publishing the leg length here, though. This is
Look at 5.7.
Yeah, I had a feeling we'd have to keep going. Okay, RNAV holding, here we go. What does ATD stand for?
A long track distance.
Gotcha. Okay, so the leg length throws away the timing, which we knew, and all right, so it is referenced to the distance from the fix at that point. So mathematically, these are two different distances then.
Right.
It's not a 4 mile leg, it's simply 4 miles from the holding point, which are two different things.
Yeah, it looks like 4 miles out and 4 miles in.
Well, no, it's going to be less than 4 miles in.
Or I'm just saying that there's half of the pattern.
It depends on the radius of turn. The turn can be made bigger or smaller slightly, even though there is a standard. So it is a not very accurate concept, but it helps.
Gotcha. It helps. Well, it's actually 100% accurate, but it's just not what I thought it was. It's not a 4 mile leg length. It's very close to it, and practically speaking, you'd call it a 4 mile leg, but it's actually not a 4 mile leg. You're 4 miles from the fix along the hypotenuse, essentially. But if you were to look at the, what this actual length, this leg length is, it'll be less. By definition, it has to be less than 4 nautical miles. And you're right, Mike, it is based on the turning radius. Right. That's good to know.
How much? I feel like the wind could affect that pretty drastically too.
The wind makes things very ugly.
Needed.
Oh gosh. So am I.
Well,
That's pretty
it
cool.
is about holes. Isn't it more about timing as opposed to space?
That is true, except for when you have a leg length specified.
If you look at 535 and read the note just below it, it actually explains it pretty good. So for instance, if they have a starting point at 10 nautical miles, it's saying the entire length of the leg will be 15 based on what the DME reads. And that would be the ending of your leg.
Let me make sure I'm finding it. Is that the 532 figure?
Keep going.
It's figure 535.
Yeah. Right there.
Yeah, but where is the leg length defined at 5 nautical miles? I'm lost.
Well, I think the end outbound leg would be 5, and then you add that to the 10 to get you to 15.
Yeah, Calvin's right. It's not in the diagram, but it is part of the scenario. Calvin, do you see the text that I highlighted? They actually stipulate a leg length of 5 miles.
Highlighting, by the way.
You're welcome, but you're right. It's for some reason it's suspiciously absent from this diagram. I see what they're saying. So if you did not have RNAV capability, so if you were holding at a DME fix and they told you they wanted 5 mile legs, then this is how you would do it. Because you don't have a computer that's telling you what your distance is. You don't have the ATD, right? What does that stand for again? Something track distance?
A long
track distance.
Thank you. Everyone seems to know what that means but me. Thank you. I've never heard that term before, so it's a new one for me. Yeah, so if you don't have an ATD readout and you're simply using just straight DME, then that would be, it's pretty simple math. So if they said you're cleared to hold cleared to the Goff's VOR 10 DME fix on whatever radial, hold east on whichever radial, 5 mile legs, that's how you know when you're at it. It'd be the 10 plus the 5. That tells you when you're at the end of that leg. But Calvin, your original question was, what happens to the timings? The timings go completely out the window when you're flying holds with specific leg lengths. And I was going to try and find that before I actually found the text for it somewhere in here. I scrolled by it before, but you only use timings if you're not using specific leg lengths.
No, what I was suggesting is that the whole idea of hold is to timing from the perspective of ATC. In other words, giving them room.
Yes, that is true. The only time, there are times when that doesn't apply though, which is when you have multiple holding stacks in relatively close proximity. So along arrivals, you'll see multiple holding points, and if they start filling up each of those holding stacks, if you didn't have specific leg lengths, under certain circumstances, it could get, the planes might end up getting a little bit closer together than you might like, I suspect, depending on how close those fixes are to each other. So having specific leg lengths takes some of the variability out of the way. It completely throws away the timing, as you've exactly implied. You can no longer guarantee timing if you're using fixed leg lengths. So if they need to keep you in a specific piece of space, the holds will be specified using leg lengths. If they don't care about the amount of geography you're using, it's more about timing, then they'll use timed legs.
And that's just above 535.
Is that in section 5 right here, point number 5, or somewhere above it?
Number 4, excuse me. It's right above you.
Right, yep.
And Keith, we should probably be clear, even on that 535 picture where they're talking about a 5 mile leg, that length of that leg is not 5 miles.
Right. I want you to fly a 5 mile leg, but whatever you do, don't fly a 5 mile leg.
Exactly. Now, the further away the DME fix is from the nav aid, the more accurate it gets.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it said, like that other example we had was 7, instead of using the 5, would that actually be 17 instead of 15 now?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, because it's what they're talking about when they say it's a 7 mile leg, it's the distance from the holding fix to the end of the outbound leg. That's that straight line distance, which is basically the height. If you were to draw a triangle, oh, he's going to whip out the annotation tool. I didn't start paying $15 a month for the sharing thing to not use this annotation tool.
Well, apparently you did.
Now here it is. I'm going to use it.
My screen seems to be frozen. Is there some way to get a refresh other than go out and come back in?
Hey, Kim. No, I think that's the only way to get the refresh.
Thank you.
should be able to just hit refresh in your browser and it'll accomplish the same thing. Meaning,
I don't know, will that
take
would that launch join me again? Oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else. It's yeah, the sharing app is a separate app, my mistake. Okay, so this hypotenuse here would be 5 miles or 7 miles, but this adjacent line, the straight one, would be less than whatever the distance is that we're talking about.
As an aside, just tested it. Yes, you can hit the refresh and bring you back to the same screen.
If we go by the old method, if the long hypotenuse is 5, it'll be a 3-4 for your 90 degree.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And we all thought we'd never need that 3-4-5 triangle.
I use it all the time in construction.
All right, so we've covered holds in a lot of depth. I knew if we went to the aim, there would be the answer. I felt bad that I was going to a source other than the aim. It kind of, that's the aim's chance to shine. And if you end up going for another reference, you're kind of missing out on opportunity to see what they've put in the aim. Because there's phenomenal information in here. There's the amount of good stuff that's in here is hard to overstate. So I do recommend people search through that when they can.
Keith, can I ask you?
Yeah, I've got a hard copy.
No, go ahead.
I was saying I've got a hard copy that I keep on the coffee table, and I pretty much require each one of my children to pick it up and read some in it every day. It's been a good habit to get into. But I had another question, so Vince, I'll pass it on to you because I've forgotten it.
Thanks, Colin. Keith, just on the ATC side of these holds, do you keep holding until ATC tells you to continue on, or do you have to call inbound every time, or what?
You should report established in the hold. That is a mandatory report, regardless of whether you're in radar contact or not. So if you're cleared to hold at a fix, then you're supposed to report entering the hold. In terms of when you leave the hold, there are 2 points at which that might happen. The first is ATC, when they give you a holding instruction, must give you an EFC time, or expect further clearance time. So they'll say cleared to whichever fix, expect further clearance at, and whatever time they specify. That is actually for lost communications more than anything else. So if your radio were to die, you would have to stay in the hold until you reached the EFC time. Then you would leave the hold and do whatever it was you were expecting after that. Practically speaking, you'll never reach your EFC, or you shouldn't reach your EFC. The EFC time is it's the worst case scenario, essentially, where if ATC were to lose communications with you, they'd expect you to continue at that point. Most likely, they'll pull you out of the hold well before that. So if 2 people are waiting to shoot an approach, 2 people are going into the same airport, IFR, only one of them can get the approach, the other person gets the hold, I will generally tack on about a 30-minute EFC for the person who's holding. Does that mean they're going to hold for 30 minutes? Absolutely not. It means they're going to hold until the first person cancels. The minute the first person cancels, that second person's going to get pulled out of the hold and given their approach clearance. So that's when you will leave the hold. It'll either be when ATC pulls you out of the hold, or when your EFC time arrives if you've lost communications. Now, if you're still in communications and your EFC time is getting close, ATC is supposed to give you either a new EFC or pull you out of the hold. If neither of those has happened, you'll probably want to ping them and say, hey, we're coming up on our EFC, and leave it at that, and then the controller will give an amended instruction at that point. When things go really south are when a holding stack is building. Let's say there's a runway closure at LAX or something like that, and it's IMC. or if they're clearing snow off the runway at Newark, they put people into a hold. The controller estimates that someone might need, say, 20 minutes to hold, so they give them an EFC of 20 minutes. Well, 18 minutes later, the runway is still not available. What might happen is they give them a new EFC time. So they'll say, your new EFC is 40 minutes past the hour, and the time is now 20 minutes past the hour. So they're basically extending the hold out further and further and further as needed. The third way you can get out of the hold is to ask for it. So if you're shooting instrument approaches and you go missed, and they say intentions, and you say, I'd like to hold for a little while on the published missed for practice, then they'll clear you to the holding. So they'll clear you to the missed approach holding point and give you an EFC. But again, that EFC is purely for lost comms. The only reason you're holding there is because you asked to be hold there. So when you're ready to leave, you can advise the controller. So they'll normally say, clear to the Van Nuys VOR, hold as published, expect further clearance at 4.5, time now 2.5. And the controller might throw on the end as a reminder, by the way, just let me know when you'd like to leave the hold, or they might say nothing, or let me know when you're ready for your next approach or something like that. So then it's really up to you when you're ready to leave. So just think about the reason why you're holding, and if you're holding because you asked to be held, then you can also be the one who initiates wanting to leave the hold. But don't say, I'm leaving the hold now, and just start making your way. Just let them know, okay, we're ready to leave the hold, and this is what we'd like to do. We'd like vectors for the ILS-16 right, or we'd like to divert to Burbank, whatever it is you'd like to do with them.
That makes good sense, and that's a good reason also to carry 45 minutes with
I'm
fuel.
very surprised to find out what you're saying, because I always, you didn't say anything about fuel. I thought one of the requirements of entering a hold is that you were supposed to report back to control what your fuel condition was.
Sorry, Calvin, one sec. Vince, what was that?
Actually, just kind of what Calvin was stating on. I just said it's a good reason to have 45 minutes extra worth of fuel.
Gotcha. Yep. So Calvin, what's your concern regarding the fuel?
I was just surprised that in your mock readback you did there, you didn't say, or says 1, 2, 3 alpha or whatever, didn't report the fuel. I thought that when you entered a hold, or when ATC gave you a hold instruction, part of your reply was supposed to give them your fuel condition. That's not true. That's not true.
Oh no, definitely not. No, there's absolutely no mandatory report that involves reporting your fuel state. The only time you'll be expected to report your fuel is if you have an emergency. So if you declare an emergency, the controller is going to say safe fuels and say fuel on board and sols. And the fuel on board is generally for fire suppression. If you come down on a flaming wreck, they want to know how much foam to spray on the runway to lay down, essentially. No, ATC doesn't care about your fuel, in quotes. It's your responsibility to manage that and tell them if you have a fuel situation. But no, you're not expected to report it to ATC at any given time that I know of.
Okay, but if I was coming in, say that I did have an extra 45 minutes, hour of fuel, but I hit some wind condition where I'm battling this 40-degree 40 mile or 60 mile an hour headwind, and my fuel reserve is getting low, then I would tell ATC that, respond back to them and let them know that I only have, 20 minutes or 15 minutes of fuel left or something, wouldn't you?
Yep, the term you want to use is minimum fuel. I used this on a trip not too long ago. So short of declaring the emergency, because you don't actually have an emergency yet, you're just unable to accept any delay. And here it is right here. So from the AIM, a really hokey copy of the AIM from the 1980s, near as I can tell from this. Oh, there it is. Effective 1999, minimum fuel advisory. Advise ATC of your minimum fuel status when your fuel supply has reached the state where, upon reaching your destination, you cannot accept any undue delay. This is not an emergency, merely an advisory that indicates an emergency situation is possible should any undue delay occur. So I declared this once when it was exactly what you described. I hit steeper than expected headwinds. I kept going, and I let the controller know that I was minimum fuel. And a little while after that, I then said, okay, we're actually not going to, I'm not comfortable continuing to our destination. We're going to divert to some other field. Yeah, so you, if you were at minimum fuel, sorry, if you were concerned about your fuel and they gave you a hold, that would obviously be a problem. But by stating that you have minimum fuel, that's likely to reduce the chance that you'll put into a hold. That's not true in 100% of the cases. It depends on why they're holding people. But it lets them know what's going on with your fuel. Again, it's not an emergency, but it lets them know I can't really take much of a delay. Then if they put you into a hold, then you go ahead and declare the emergency, and that'll get you out of the hold quickly if possible. Then you'll just have to answer for as to why you have no fuel.
Okay, so as I'm coming in, I need to be proactive when I contact approach and respond to them. Cessna 910 Charlie Juliet 6000 minimal fuel.
Minimum. Yep, correct.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.